It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate. We're continuing to look at the Trump administration's posture towards Iran. In part one of this conversation, we looked at the Trump administration reviewing the Iran nuclear deal and exploring whether it wants to reimpose the sanctions that were lifted as part of that agreement. Now in part two, we're going to look at areas of tension between the U.S. and Iran regionally, from Yemen to Syria. And our guest for that is someone who used to work for the Iranian government and maintains close contacts there. Seyed Hossein Mousavian is a former senior Iranian diplomat who served in several top posts. He is now a Middle East and nuclear policy specialist at Princeton University. Dr. Mousavian, welcome.
Morning.
Let's move on to the other regional issues that are at the heart of Iranian-U.S. tensions right now. So you had James Mattis saying that everywhere you look in the region where there's trouble, you see Iran. You had Rex Tillerson talking about Iran's support for terrorism and pointing to places like Yemen. Saudi Arabia has said for years that that part of the reason why it has to fight in Yemen is because the Houthis are a proxy of Iran. And I was speaking recently to journalist Iona Craig, who's covered Yemen for years, and she said that initially, when the Saudis first launched their campaign in March 2015, there was almost no Iranian government support, military support for the Houthis, but the devastating Saudi campaign there has actually prompted Iran to get involved. Now they are actually delivering weapons to the Houthis. What can you tell us about what Iran is doing in Yemen and its strategy there?
The day Saudi Arabia attacked Yemen, I told a Saudi friend, this is a big mistake you made, and this would become your Vietnam. He laughed at me, and he said, Hossein, you know what? We would finish in 1 week. This was really their assumption. That's why the U.S. supported, because they believed they would be able to finish Yemen issue, Zaydis, Houthis in 1 week.
Okay,
now,
so my question now is, 2 years later, with the U.S. now vowing to ramp up its support for Saudi Arabia, and you have a case where Iran now actually is supporting the Houthis, contrary to how they were not initially, but now they are. Are we seeing the danger of a worsening proxy war inside Yemen between these two sides?
No, the danger is there. No one can deny. However, I believe we need United Nations Security Council, the 5 permanent members, to step in. We need Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, United States, the regional and the big powers immediately to sit together. And rather than war, airstrike, military strike, they find a political solution for Yemen, which is really possible. It is possible. It is not too difficult. Otherwise, yes, I believe if they continue the war in Yemen, Yemenis would not be silent. They would not sit at home. They would fight Saudi Arabia. They would fight the U.S. And it is not only Iran. There are some other countries also supporting Yemen against the Saudi invasion.
On the issue of Syria, critics of Iran point to the support for the Assad regime which has committed a number of atrocities, killed the vast majority of victims in that conflict, and don't understand why Tehran could ally itself with Assad. My question to you is Tehran's support for Assad, is it linked to the pressure that it faces from the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia? So if Iran didn't feel so much antagonism coming from those areas, would Assad become more expendable to the Iranian government?
Iran is supporting Assad because the grand strategy of Iran in the region is to resist against the notions, attempts for bringing regime change in the region through military strike. This has been the U.S. policy, attacking many countries to bring regime change. Iran is completely on the other side. Iranians, they are totally against foreign intervention, military strike to bring regime change.
But Dr.
That's why
Mousavian,
they are supporting Assad.
but Dr. Mousavian, it can't just be that they're against regime change, because I imagine that, if the U.S. someday decided they want a regime change in Saudi Arabia, I don't think Iran would object. So my question is, is support for Assad, is it tied to creating some leverage and some protection for them against what they see as hostility towards their own government, towards protecting them from regime change in Tehran?
No, hold on. Even as of today, Assad government internationally is the legal government of Syria. Assad government has ambassador in United Nations, not terrorist groups. Therefore, the argument is here. From the beginning of some demonstrations in Syria, Saudi Arabia, Europe, US, Qatar, other Arab regional countries, they recruited Turkey, they recruited tens of thousands of terrorists from Chechnya, Central Asia, from United States, from Europe, from all over the world. And they exported tens of thousands of terrorists with tens of billions of dollars of weapons and money to bring a regime change. Imagine if we did not have tens of thousands of foreign fighters, terrorists in Syria, would we have such a Syria today? No.
Well, that's a debatable point. I mean, that's...
No, it is not. It is not. I tell you why. It is not. You remember Joe Biden, the vice president of Obama? He had a public talk at Harvard 2014. Joe Biden publicly said, our problem in Syria is our own allies. He named Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Emirates.
Our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world.
The U.S. problem is, he said, our own allies in the region. Therefore, the U.S. understands what is the issue.
He certainly did blame the Gulf states for funding these jihadist groups in Syria, and he definitely apportioned a large part of the blame to them. I guess the question is, does that mean Iran has to then go and support a dictator who has killed the majority of victims in the conflict?
If you want to say dictators, we have too many dictators. Do we have democracy in Saudi Arabia? Do we have democracy in Bahrain? In Bahrain also you have a very minority ruling the majority. 80% of Bahrainis are Shia. They have been treated the same by the minority government of Bahrain. The U.S. is supporting the minority government, dictatorship government in Bahrain. The issue is not dictatorship. Believe me, we have too many dictators.
I'm not saying it's dictatorship. I'm certainly not saying that. I'm not saying that. No, of course not. And of course, and in Bahrain, that's an example where the U.S. backed the Gulf invasion that put down the uprising. So I take your point there.
Therefore, we have to come back to international principles. The Syria has a legal government. Thousands of terrorists are there. First of all, the US, Iran, Saudi Arabia, they all should cooperate to clean Syria from terrorists, number one. Second, immediately, they should go for a free election supervised by United Nations, not by Assad government. United Nations Security Council can supervise a free election in Syria. Let it Syrian nation to decide about their future, about their president, about their constitution. It is not for Saudi Arabia or the US or Iran to say who should rule Syria. It is for Syrian nation. And they need election. If they do not trust Assad, no problem. Election can be held, supervised by United Nations. But first, you have to clean Syria from terrorist groups, because today 60% of Syrian land is in the hand of terrorists. And Assad military, Assad security establishment is the only real force fighting the terrorist groups. You cannot fight Assad and terrorists at the same time.
Well, the Kurds are also fighting ISIS. That's one group. But listen, let's move on from Syria. And let me ask you about these upcoming elections in Iran. The re-election of President Rouhani is not guaranteed. Now, he comes from the more moderate wing. What do you think will happen if the hardliners win out? So you have we have a hardline president in Iran versus the hawkish people that are in the Trump administration right now.
I think if we are talking about the nuclear deal, anyone who wins in Iran would be committed to nuclear deal, whether from principalist or conservative, you say, or moderates. It doesn't matter who is going to win. The nuclear deal, Iran would be completely committed, because this is international agreement. This is not a party agreement, which a party in Iran can violate it. However, about the regional issues, I think if the conservatives, they win, they would be definitely more tough, and they would be much more aggressive toward the U.S. in case the U.S. is going to continue their hostile policy. But the moderates, they would try to stop the U.S. through international organizations, through United Nations, through multilateral international approach, rather than fighting directly with the U.S. in each country in the region.
I remember reading that the foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, he said that he wanted the nuclear deal to be not the ceiling for U.S.-Iran relations, but the ground floor. So he wanted more areas of accommodation. Yep. So where do you think Iran is flexible in ways that most people wouldn't know? I'm thinking of in 2003, there was a peace offer proposed through, I believe, the Swiss embassy to the U.S. that the U.S. rejected. So where could Iran and the U.S. cooperate in areas that we might not, or at least most of us, know about?
The U.S. has tried twice. One on the nuclear. Iran has been cooperative. Everyone is satisfied. And once on Afghanistan, a regional issue, which Iran cooperated, and the U.S. ambassador says it was the failure of the U.S. not responding correctly to Iranian goodwill. Therefore, we have the history. We have the evidences. On the regional issue and international issue, nuclear and Afghanistan, there are a very clear history as evidence how Iranians are ready to negotiate and how Iranians are ready to cooperate. I believe this is more on the U.S. side. If the U.S. side understands the reality, then we have a lot of common interest. Iran and the U.S., they have common interest to fight ISIS, al-Qaeda. Look at all these groups. ISIS, al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, Boko Haram, they are all one package coming from one source of ideology, which Iran and the US, they hate this type of ideology and extremism, and they really can cooperate. Even in Iraq, practically without direct cooperation, they are on the same boat, helping Iraqi government. Iranians and Americans practically are helping Iraqi government to fight ISIS. They are in the same side. They are in the same boat. They have common interest for security and stability of energy. They have common interest to fight drug trafficking. They are common interest to fight terrorism. There are a lot of issues of communalities.
Okay, let me ask you on two key issues. Let me ask you on two key issues. Dr. Mousavian, let me ask you on two key issues. Could Iran accept a peace settlement somehow in Syria where Assad leaves as part of a peaceful transition? And could Iran also accept the Arab League peace offer to Israel that's been on the table for a long time, which is basically full normalization in return for Israel's withdrawal from the occupied territories and the creation of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. Could Iran accommodate there?
Look, if there is going to be a real serious peace negotiation, which Israelis have never been committed, even you understand Netanyahu has declined the two-state solution initiated by the US, Arab League, Arab countries, Europeans. Therefore, the issue is not really Iran, is Netanyahu to accept the two-state solution. However, if there is any type of agreement between Palestinians and Israelis, the Iranian supreme leader once, 2-3 years ago, publicly said Iran is not going to disturb, Iran would respect their decision by Palestinians. Whatever Palestinians they decide, Iran would respect that decision. This is on the Palestinian-Israeli. Iran is not going to disturb a real peace which Palestinians would agree, This is one. On Syria, if the US, if Saudi Arabia, if the West is ready to shake hands with Russia and Iran, to fight seriously, genuinely, to clean Syria from the terrorists first, then Iran would agree for a free election supervised by United Nations for Syrian nation to decide about president, about their own constitution, about their own future. Iran would respect any decision by Syrian nation through a free election supervised by United Nations. That's it.
And we'll leave it there. Dr. Seyed Hossein Mousavian, former senior Iranian diplomat, now Middle East and nuclear policy specialist at Princeton University. Dr. Mousavian, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.